We are in a series on Mark's Gospel. This is the 7th in the series. We're looking at discipleship. We're doing the discipleship pathway at the moment as a church. It's a 9-module, 3-year program, and it's linked to our preaching. And this is the 7th in the series in Mark's Gospel. And I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker for today, who is Katherine Chow. Is originally a family from Hong Kong. She was born and brought up in this country, but practiced as a lawyer for 10 years in New York. She is qualified as a solicitor and admitted to the New York bar and advised on business immigration. Having done that for 10 years, she had a career change and took on the role of EA to Martin Lazelle, who's the associate vicar here. She's a very remarkable woman, and we're thrilled to have her on our staff. And she gave a staff thought recently, and as a result of that, I asked her to come and preach. This is the first time she's ever preached here, and I ask you to give a very warm welcome to Katherine Chow.
If you have your Bibles, will you turn with me to two passages in Mark? Mark 9, 33 to 35, and Mark 10, 42 to 45. That's on pages 1023 and 1025 in the blue Bibles, and it's also going to come up on the screen too. So, Mark 9, 33 to 35. Who is the greatest? They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all." Mark 10, 42 to 45. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." I want to ask you a question, and it's a question that I've thought a lot about. What does greatness look like? What does greatness look like? If you look into the world and our culture, greatness is defined by prominence, prestige, and pay. If you've made a name for yourself, if you can afford certain luxuries, if you're a celebrity with a huge following, then these are the indicators of greatness. But as we've seen in these two passages, Jesus says that greatness is connected to service. I don't know about you, but those two definitions seem to be worlds apart. As Stephen mentioned, I joined this team here at HTB 6 months ago. But before that, I was a US immigration lawyer, and I primarily advised corporations on employment-based business immigration to the US. And I did some family-based immigration work too. I'd done this for about 10 years. And I think I became a lawyer because I wanted to be of service to people. But if I'm totally honest, there was a part of me that pursued law because I wanted to please my parents. Immigration is an area of law which aligned with my personal values. And it actually has a really special place in my heart because my parents immigrated from Hong Kong to England, and then me and my siblings were born and raised here. I do confess that I speak Cantonese, but it is with a British accent, and it's not attractive. After I completed my studies here in London, I moved to New York City and lived there for 10 years. And I don't know how many of you have been to New York, but it is a place with a buzz, it's thriving, it's a city that never sleeps. It is a place, much like London, that people go to pursue greatness. People go there to build their career, and it adds kind of a good chunk of experience on your CV. It might open some doors for you if you've worked in New York City for a few years. I loved living there. It was a real melting pot, and being an immigration lawyer, it really doesn't get better than practicing in New York. And I met a lot of talented people and ambitious people while I was living in New York. One of the favorite types of cases I used to work on as a lawyer were the extraordinary ability green card cases. This is where the US government will grant you lawful permanent residence if you possess extraordinary ability in your field. And there's regulatory criteria in order to be eligible for this green card. So if you've won awards, if you've got a lot of press, if you've written some articles, if you're cited as an authority, if you've served on a panel, if you've judged the work of others, if you've made an original contribution in your field, and if you've made quite a bit of money as well, that doesn't hurt your case. So what I used to do is I used to sit down with people, talented people, and I would ask them about their story, how they'd gotten to where they'd gotten to today, and whether to find out whether they were eligible for this category. So I'd sit down, listen to their story, and I'd look at the evidence, and we'd talk about case strategy. And I used to work with journalists and business executives and entrepreneurs, scientists, doctors, researchers, and lawyers, artists, creatives, to figure out whether they were eligible for this kind of green card. To be honest, as I reflect back on my time in New York and the people I met, I sometimes wonder whether I had done anything significant in comparison. Everyone seemed to be super ambitious and at the top of their game. And reflecting on this time makes me realize how much the world is an achievement-oriented world. Our definition of success and a great life is based on how we're moving up the ladder and pursuing personal achievement, and actually how we tend to assign value and worth on people based on what they do. The New York Times journalist David Brooks has written a book called The Road to Character, and in it he talks about the resume values and the eulogy values. The resume values are the ones that we bring to the marketplace, but the eulogy values are the ones that are talked about at your funeral, whether you were kind, brave, honest, or faithful. And I think deep down we all know that the eulogy virtues are more important. But our culture and our society and our educational systems tend to focus on the resume virtues. You're taught all the time how to build your career, but you actually talk very little about how to develop inner character. I'll be honest with you, when I was living in New York, I spent a lot of time in the office. Long hours were normal. And I often felt the tension in my own life between the eulogy values and the resume values. When you work so much, you find like you don't have capacity to do things that you love outside of work or spend time with people that really matter to you. If you live and work in London, you'll identify with this tension. I sacrificed a lot for my career. My immediate family were all based in London, and I used to spend 1 week of every year at home in London with my family. And if you do the math, that's 10 weeks over 10 years that I'd seen my family. And my colleagues used to joke that they would see me more than my immediate family. It wasn't a joke, it was totally true. I missed 10 years worth of birthdays, anniversaries, and weddings. There are 10 years of photos in the Chow family archives that I don't feature in. And so in September of 2013, I moved back to London to be closer to my family. I don't know about your family, but all we tend to do in our family is have a lot of food, and the TV's usually on, and everyone's just together. We're actually not really talking to each other, we just kind of hang out. So we did a lot of hanging out when I moved back home. And it was such a gift to be closer to people that really mattered to me. 18 months after I moved home, in February of 2015, my dad was diagnosed with advanced stage lung cancer and passed away 10 months later in December of 2015. He was 64 years old, and he was 1 year shy of retirement. I never thought that my dad would die. And for anyone who's ever lost a parent or a loved one, you know that there are no words to describe the loss and the grief that you feel. I realized how fragile life is, how our time here is so finite, how none of us knows how much time we have here, and how things tend to happen in our lives that seem so out of our control. I remember the day of my dad's funeral. We didn't know who was going to show up, but we got to the church, and when the doors opened, we were blown away by how many people had shown up. Our family friends were there. Our neighbours were there. Extended family had flown in from overseas. Our church community had shown up. People who had volunteered with my dad were there too. All of my dad's work colleagues were there. And as the funeral ceremony ended, people stepped forward and started to share stories about my dad. One elderly woman came up to us and said, "Your dad used to help me change my light bulbs." And we lived in a community where there are a lot of elderly. And one neighbour came up to us and said, "One winter, your father showed up on my doorstep and knocked my door. And he had an extra set of windscreen wipers and some antifreeze. And he just said, 'I have an extra set. Would you like them?' And he just said, 'That's just the kind of man that your dad was.'" And another woman came up, and she said that when she immigrated to this country, she didn't speak any English. And so my dad went with them to schools to translate for them and to help them find school placements for their children. I had no idea. My dad had never talked about these things. They seemed like they were really small things. But I think what my dad had done had made an impact. It was nothing extraordinary. I'd been around extraordinary people in New York. And here I just saw it was just small, simple acts of service done to people around him. And as I reflected on that, Jesus' passage about greatness being connected to service was so true. Greatness is connected to service. My dad's death made me question everything I was doing in my life, what I was pursuing. What was the meaning of life? Grief stripped away everything that felt inauthentic to me. And actually, for a huge part of 2016, all I felt was loss and sadness. My faith was the only resource I had to face my suffering. The only Bible verse that consoled me was Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." The bereavement journey at HTB had been recommended to me. And to be honest, I was really hesitant. I didn't really want to go on a 6-week course to learn about grief and bereavement. But I thought I needed to understand the framework. I needed to see if there were other people that were going through something similar. And so we went on the course. And they say on the course, the only way out of grief is to go through it. It was so helpful and such a refuge, and I would recommend it to anyone who has been bereaved and is going through grief. And one of the quotes they give you in the bereavement journey handbook stayed with me. It's a quote by Rick Warren, and it says, "Your deepest life message will come out of your deepest pain." The deepest life message that I received through this whole journey was that we're created to love, worship, and serve the living God. Outside of that, your life doesn't really make sense. Our hearts yearn for something that the world can never satisfy. If you worship and serve money and worldly success and seek power and status and earthly greatness, these things will only eventually leave you empty. In a strange way, loss gave me real clarity and perspective in life. I just decided I'm just not going to sweat the small stuff anymore. If anything happened, I would sit back and think, in the grand scheme, is any of this important? Grief forces you to reevaluate your life. And I remember starting to think about what I was doing with my life. Whose kingdom was I really building? What was I pursuing? I saw firsthand how we come into the world with nothing and we leave with nothing at the end. And I remember sitting down in my office at the time and thinking about what is the one thing the world needs the most? And through, the world needs the gospel. Full stop. People just need to encounter Jesus. And the follow-up question to that question is, what can I do to advocate for the gospel? What cause is worth committing your entire life, energy, passion, skills, and ambition toward? I wanted to play my small part in advocating for the gospel. I just felt something stirring inside. I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. And then my prayer was that God would show me what he wanted me to do, and I would do it. And so, not having a background in working for the church, I'd never worked for the church before, and I'd never worked for a non-profit organization, I thought I should apply, maybe for an assistant role at HTB. And you should be assured that this organization goes through a very rigorous interview process. And I went to at least 3 interviews here. And on the second interview, I remember the person asked me, "Are you sure you want to be someone's assistant? I've looked at your CV and you're slightly overqualified for this job." And I remember sitting there and thinking, how am I supposed to answer this? And I think I said, if Jesus can wash the disciples' feet, then I think I'm okay with some admin. The thing is, I think all work has dignity in God's eyes. There is no hierarchy. All work has dignity in God's eyes. And God cares deeply about the intentions, the motivations, and the attitudes that go behind what we do. To cut a long story short, I've been on staff here for 6 months, and it's been a huge learning experience for me. I work alongside some amazing people who teach me every day what service looks like. But we still live in the world. And it's still so incredibly hard to shake off the mentality that we're defined not by what we do, but by what has been done for us by Jesus. It's so countercultural. It's the total opposite to what the world says. The world's definition of a great and successful life is moving up the ladder. But Jesus has repeatedly shown us the example. The path to greatness is not upward, it's downward. The world will tell you to climb the ladder towards personal achievement. But Jesus tells us to humble ourselves and descend further and further in service to one another, to each other, to those around us, and to love the broken, weak, poor, needy, and vulnerable. When the disciples are squabbling about who is going to be the greatest, Jesus tells them clearly, "Not so with you. Whoever wishes to be first must be last, and whoever wants to be greatest must be slave to all." And he demonstrated this in his life here on earth. Jesus was entitled to everything, and he gave it all up. Jesus' deepest act of service to humanity was by going to the cross to reconcile us to God. And as we think about what this means in our lives and what following Jesus is all about, I think we need to think about our leadership too. I don't know if you guys are going to leadership conference. I'm really excited. I can't wait to be in the Royal Albert Hall and be in the presence of some incredible people and learn from their wisdom. But as I think about leadership, time and time again, I'm convicted that the kind of leadership that Jesus talks about is servant leadership. It's something that the world simply can't offer us. Good leaders, good stewards, servant leaders. It's a powerful thing, and it's a thing that the world needs most. It's desperately hungry for it. And I want to share with you something that happened during my second week here on staff. We have a staff meeting, and there's a breakfast that's served at the back. And every team is rotated in to serve breakfast at staff meeting. And part of the whole role is that you also clean up afterwards. So my boss, his name is Martin, we're serving the breakfast, and then we have to clear it up. And we used to serve porridge here in a huge pot, and most of it went uneaten. And I don't know if you've cooked porridge, but when it's stale and cold, it's kind of gloopy and semi-solid, and no one really wants to touch it. So I remember we started clearing up, and we're in the that kitchen in the back, and everyone's looking at this pot of porridge, and no one wants to touch it. We all love Jesus, but no one wants to touch the pot of porridge. And I'm standing there, and Martin's standing here, and Martin turns to me and he says, "Katherine, you go outside and worship. I'll clean the porridge pot." And my initial thought was, this is my second week here. I don't really know this man very well. Is this a trick question? But he was serious. He was totally serious. And he said, "No, Katherine." I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yes, go outside and worship." And it blew me away, because I think I saw a glimpse of servant leadership. And I just saw Jesus in it. I don't know how many senior partners of law firms would do that for their secretary. But here it was. Jesus showed us how he lived here on earth, the model we're supposed to follow. He showed us what he cared about and in who he reached out to. He repeatedly crosses social, economic, gender, racial, and culture barriers time and time again to serve and love people in the Gospels. The world is hungry for this kind of grace, and no one offers it but Jesus. And while Jesus says that greatness is connected to service sometimes comes at a cost. It costs the servant something. And I don't know about you, but I often feel overwhelmed by how I'm supposed to serve people. I sometimes think about what it will cost me, and it's a little bit overwhelming. But the truth is, you simply don't have the resources in you to live in this countercultural way from within yourself. I know that I do not have the strength, the determination, and the drive to live in this countercultural way. Every day, I need to look to Jesus and ask the Spirit to empower and equip me to love and to serve people around me. Our own personal relationship with God is so important. As a church, we're looking at the discipleship pathway, how we be with Jesus, how we become like Jesus, and then we do the Jesus stuff. But I think it's easier to think about it in a linear way, that we graduate from one stage to the next. But I don't think it's like that at all. We be with Jesus, we become like Jesus on top of that, and then we do the Jesus stuff. But the being with Jesus is the most important part. It fuels us to live in the countercultural way. You may be sitting here wondering whether God sees all that you face in your life. It could be the stresses of work, the competitiveness of the marketplace, pressures from your boss, the demands within your family, and expectations placed on you by people around you. Maybe whether you'll find a good job after you finish your studies, or actually maybe whether you'll pass your exams and complete your education. I want to encourage you that God understands exactly where you are at, and he knows all the things that you face in your life. Jesus came into this world to give you a full, rich, and meaningful life. He loves you so much. Your identity as a child of God is not based on your performance or your achievements. You are known completely and loved unconditionally. You have total security in Jesus. And when you know you are totally loved by God, you can step out from that place in faith and serve people even when it feels costly. Serving people in the smallest of ways is the way to kingdom greatness. And we don't do it because it makes us feel good. We do it because it's an act of worship in response to the love that God has poured out to us through Christ. God has placed you exactly where you are at for a reason. There are people in your life that only you can reach and serve. Serve where God has planted you. Don't be overwhelmed or fearful, but be encouraged that every time you humble yourself and descend into loving service to those around you, we honor, glorify, and point to the true servant king, Jesus Christ. Amen.
I'm Bear Grylls. My favourite way to start the day, the Bible in 1 year. That's how wild I am.
Find out more at BibleIn1year.org or download the Bible in 1 Year app.